How many of you know my form of mapping? Okay, so normally this takes about 2 days to introduce you into the concept of mapping. I was given half an hour, of which we've got about 20 minutes left. So I'm going to talk about maps, surprisingly enough. Where we're going to go, I'm going to start off with the issue of strategy, which is how I got into maps themselves. And then I'm going to talk about communication and the purpose of why maps are good at this. Then we'll talk about patterns, economic patterns, patterns of organization. Then we'll get into anticipation, then talk about flow. And afterwards, if we have time, we'll wrap it all up and discuss the whole world of serverless. Okay, and we're going to do that in about 20 minutes. So this is where I'm going to start, strategy. So I used to work for this company, for Tango, online photo service, 16 different lines of business, around about 10 million users. This was about 2004, very profitable, revenue growing, but it had a problem. The problem was this person, the CEO. The CEO was a fake CEO. They were making it up as they went along. And I know this because I was the CEO. I mean, we had, vision statements, strategy statements, things like this. Our strategy is customer focused. We will lead an innovative effort in the market through our use of agile techniques and open source. But I pinched that from another company and literally just changed a few words. So I was a little bit worried that other people would rumble that I didn't know what I was talking about. So I went around recording other CEOs talking about strategy. I used to take a tape recorder, record the conversations, and I'd write out the common words they would use. I called them business level abstractions of a healthy strategy, or BLAS for short. I've done this every couple of years. This was 2014, common BLAS, digital business, big data, disruptive, innovative, collaborative. If I did it today, what words would you hear? We've had AI, yes, AI. Any other word? Blockchain, yeah, you can't do anything without a bit of blockchain. So I then grabbed a whole bunch of companies' documents and put them together and created a BLA template. So our strategy is BLA. We will lead a BLA effort of the market through our use of BLA and BLA to build a BLA. And then I combined the BLAs and the BLA templates and auto-generated 64 random strategies. Things like this. Our strategy is customer-focused. We will lead a disruptive effort of the market through our use of innovative social media and big data to build a collaborative cloud-based ecosystem. Things like this. Our strategy is innovative digital business. Anyway, it's painful. But I sent these around, and I got 400 responses back. 3 basic types. The first one, this is the exact wording from our business plan. The second one was, I've seen 2 of these used already. And the third, and my favorite, was, are you for hire? So a friend of mine's put this all online. This is strategy as a service. So if you ever need a strategy, just type in the URL. It will automatically generate you one based upon nothing whatsoever. If it makes you feel comfortable, you can pretend there's AI and blockchain behind it. I mean, if that's good. So this is, and if you don't like it, it's pretty simple. Just press refresh. So there I was, running this company, and I wasn't the chess player. I was the alchemist, making it up as I went along. When it came to navigation, learning, and strategy, I was all about storytelling, secrets of success, magic frameworks, what I call a low-level situational awareness environment. I used to read things religiously, things like Harvard Business Review. Have you heard of HBR? This is my favorite HBR article from November 2011. It's brilliant. Phrenology of management, how earlobes can signify leadership potential. When you get back to your office, grab the CEO, pin them to the ground, and measure their earlobe. It's fabulous stuff. Anyway, so I wanted to be in this world of chess, where navigation is visual, it's context-specific, it's the game at hand, it's all about position and movement. So it's a bit like the military. It's a high-level situational awareness environment. So if you ask a general, why did you bomb a hill? The general isn't going to turn around to you and say, well, I read an article in General Weekly saying bombing hills is the latest thing, so we went and got a hill and bombed it. They're not going to tell you, I got a consultant report saying 67% of other generals are doing AI and bombing hills, therefore we should go and bomb a hill. And they're not going to tell you that we bombed a hill because that's what Uber would do. But this is what we do in business. So I wanted to get from there to there, and I thought, well, how do I do this? So I started to look back through military history, and I came across Themistocles, ancient politician, Greek general. Now, fascinating story. He was from the Athens, the city Greek states. Persians were invading, about 170,000 Persians. What they decided to do was block off the Straits of Artemisium, force the Persians along a coastal road into a narrow pass called Thermopylae, where a small number of troops could defend against a larger force. So about 140 to 170,000 Persians, we're not quite sure. About 4,000 Greeks, including 300. Perfect. So I want you to imagine it's the eve of battle. I'm Themistocles, I'm giving you purpose and moral imperative. We want to defend against the invading Persian horde. But then I say to you, I don't understand the landscape, I don't understand the environment, I have no map, but have no fear, for I have created a SWOT diagram. Strengths, a well-trained Spartan army, a high level of motivation not to become a Persian slave. Weaknesses, the E4s might stop the Spartans turning up, a truckload of Persians are turning up. Opportunities, get rid of the Persians, get rid of the Spartans. We're Athenian, we actually hate the Spartans. And the threats, the Persians get rid of us, and the Oracle says a really dodgy film might be produced a few thousand years later. So, what would you use to communicate and determine strategy in battle? Position and movement described by a map or some sort of magic framework like a SWOT diagram? Map. Good. What do you think we use in business? SWOTs. That's what I was doing. So I realized the difference between the environments was the existence or non-existence of some sort of map. But what is a map? Well, maps, space has meaning. What do I mean by that? Is if I move a piece on a map, it changes the meaning of the map. And it does so because you've got an anchor. In the case of geographical maps, that's magnetic north. You've got the position of pieces relative to each other. This is north, south, east, or west of that. And you've got consistency of movement. Okay? So I looked at the maps I had in my organization. I had business process maps, mind maps, I had systems maps. And so I took a systems map, and I took a component, CRM, and I moved it. How has that changed the map? It hasn't. If I take a map, a geographical map, and shift, say, Melbourne, and move it next to Atlanta, does that change the meaning of that map? Right. So the interesting thing is all the maps that I had in business had one thing in common. Do you know what it was? Yes, none of them were maps. We keep on using that word, and I'm afraid it doesn't mean what we think it means. So how to create a map? So I took a systems diagram. I first had to give it an anchor. So in this case, I put the customer at the top. When you are mapping, you may have many anchors, so government and business, regulators could be anchors. I started off with what is their need, and each of these components have their own needs, so you can create position through a chain of needs. Now that gives me anchor and position. I'm still missing movement. And it turns out that all forms of capital evolve through a common pattern. We call it the genesis of the novel and new, custom-built examples, products and rental services, commodity and utility. So if I combine those together, now what I've got is a map. And that was the first map that I produced in 2005. So what? Well, the first thing is communication. So with a cup of tea, I'm going to do a tea shop here. You start off with the business has a need to sell cups of tea. The public has a need to drink cups of tea, we hope. A cup of tea needs a cup, it needs tea, it needs hot water. Hot water needs cold water, a kettle, and a kettle needs power. Now, the first thing with this map is we're focusing on the anchor, so what are the core user needs, both the business and the public? The first thing that happens when you give this map to someone else is they can challenge it. So they might say you're missing staff. And then somebody says, well, staff's more of a commodity. And then you give it to somebody in finance, and they will go, each of the nodes are stocks of capital, each of the lines are flows of capital. And so from this, we can actually build basic P&Ls. And then you'll give it to somebody in operations, and they'll go, why are we custom building kettles? Why aren't we using standard kettles? And then somebody from marketing will go, it's all about brand exclusivity. And then somebody will go, well, it's all about ethical trading and fair conditions. The point about the map is it doesn't matter whether it's HR, finance, or development, or operations, or business, or whatever. We can all discuss the same environment using a single map. Now, for me, back in 2005, I had huge amounts of business alignment issues. They literally disappeared. The only reason why they existed is because we weren't communicating. And this doesn't matter whether I'm talking about an individual system, whether I'm talking about an individual business or an industry or something like the United Nations where we're looking at reducing global poverty. But it's not only within a system, it's between groups. So I'll give you an example from government to do with weighing scales. We have a department who has to produce a count for another department. It gets that count from weighing machines. So what happens is we produce so many paper forms, it's quicker to weigh them to work out the number of paper forms than it is to actually physically count them up. And so they're doing a digitization effort to turn this into a more digital electronic version, spending a few million. So what they're doing is weighing paper forms. So you take that map, and I went along and asked goods in, because where did the paper forms come from? They came from goods in. So I went and said, where do you get your paper forms from? And they said, oh, we have distribution sites all over the country, about 30 of them. Okay, so I go and talk to a distribution site. Where are you getting your paper forms from? We're printing them out. We have these big printing facilities. Right, so you're printing out these forms and sending them to this other group. Do you know what the other group is doing with them? No. Okay, where are you printing them out from? We're printing them out from our CRM system, which our users fill online. Right, so your users fill in online, and you print out the forms, and you send those forms to this other group who, by the way, weigh them to work out the number of forms that people filled out online. This is not because people are stupid, they're trapped by their context. All of this can be replaced with select count staff and table. All of it. So does a digitization effort make any sense? No. Okay. So once you start to communicate, then you start to discover patterns. Now in total, there's 30 common economic patterns, 40 patterns of doctrine, about 100 different forms of gameplay. Most people are oblivious to all of this, and we don't have time to go through it all, so I'm just going to show you just a few. So when you have a map, the first thing you learn is everything evolves due to supply and demand competition. Doesn't matter what it is, penicillin, money, computing, starts off over on the left, ends up over on the right. As it evolves, it becomes more efficient. But we also have inertia to the change, created by pre-existing capital. So we invest a lot in this space, so we don't want it to change. Blockbuster, Netflix, who was first with a website? Good. Who was first with video or ordering online? Good. Blockbuster. Who was first with video streaming experiments? Blockbuster. Good. Right. Who went bankrupt first? Right, it wasn't because they lacked innovation, they out-innovated everyone, same as Kodak. It's because they had pre-existing business models, late fees, which created inertia to the change. So the next thing you learn is as things evolve and become more efficient, they enable higher order systems to appear. So the speed at which we can build higher order systems accelerates, electricity enabling radio, television, etc. This is an effect known as componentization, Herbert Simon's theory of hierarchy. Now, those higher order systems become new sources of value of worth. We call them the adjacent unexplored, but here be dragons. They're very uncertain. We don't know which one's going to be successful. Okay? So the next thing you learn is those higher order systems create those new sources of value. So what you've got is efficiency, increasing speed of building new things, which create new sources of value of worth. Now, if you're competing against others, and one company adapts and has the benefits of efficiency, speed, and worth, they create pressure on all the rest of you to change. As more adapt, that pressure mounts and mounts, which is why you have no choice over evolution. This is known as the Red Queen effect, Professor Van Valen. So what you've got, things evolve, become more efficient, enable higher order systems, create new sources of value or worth, and they evolve. And as things evolve, their characteristics change. They start off in this uncharted space, chaotic, uncertain, unpredictable, and over time, it doesn't matter, it's money, it's penicillin, whatever, it becomes industrialized, ordered, standard, generic drugs, etc. Now, because of this, there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all management methods. It doesn't matter whether I'm talking about financing, or whether I'm talking about purchasing, or whether I'm talking about project management. So extreme programming, really strong on the left-hand side, because it reduces the cost of change, but it is terrible compared to Six Sigma on the right, where what you want to do is reduce deviation, and both of them are pretty hopeless compared to lean approaches in the middle, where you're all about reducing waste and learning. So what you learn is not agile everywhere, but if you say that at some conferences, burn him heretic. So this is HS2, high-speed rail, heavy engineering project. To build it, James Finley, who was the CIO, built the entire railway first in a virtual world, because it's cheaper to dig up a virtual world and go, whoops, we got that wrong, than it is the English countryside. So he starts off with a systems diagram for building an entire virtual world, and his problem is, do I outsource it all? Do I use off-the-shelf products? Do I build it all in-house with agile techniques? Or do I use some combination of all three? The problem here is a simple diagram like this. There are 387 million possible permutations. So which one is the right one? So pretty simple. You turn it into a map. You now outsource all the stuff on the right, build off-the-shelf products in the middle, build in-house agile techniques on the left, which is what they did, and which is why they went in front of the Public Accounts Committee, under budget, massively under budget, ahead of schedule, all singing praises because they used appropriate methods. So I'll give you an example. I'm going to do a self-driving car. I'm going to pretend you're all from finance and I'm from IT, which means all IT is a bit Elvish to you. So I'm going to take a systems diagram, which I've translated into Elvish, and I want to collaborate and work with you, so I'm going to ask some questions. Should we outsource or build our own? What do you think? We do this to finance all the time, by the way. Anybody any ideas? Yes, you have no clue, do you? Right, there's the mapping, exactly the same diagram in mapping format. Should we outsource or build our own? A. A. Should we outsource or build our own? B. So suddenly context, it's all easy. Right, so once you get through communicating and learning patterns, we can now start to anticipate change. So back in 2005, we had a map. We knew that things would evolve. We knew we would have inertia to the change. We knew it would enable higher order systems. So the map tells us multiple points that we can attack. Do we wish to attack here, here, or here? Where do we wish to invest? And that's one of the key things about strategy. It's not just about the why of purpose, it's the why of movement. What do we invest here or there? And so I used this at Ubuntu. So back in 2008, we mapped out the cloud space. Ubuntu was about 2 to 3% of the operating system market. I spent $500,000. It cost me 18 months. And what happened with Ubuntu, if you remember, that's us. By 2010, we took 70% of all cloud from Red Hat and Microsoft. Literally cost me $500,000 to take that entire industry. Do you remember? Does anybody remember that? It was all Red Hat, Microsoft, and then suddenly it was all Ubuntu? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so one of the key questions here is where to focus. So when I've got a map, do I focus on evolutionary flow or do I focus on process flow? That's a key thing. And to give you an example of this flow, I'm going to look at the insurance industry. So this is a particular insurance company. Here's their process flow. Compute, order server, goods in, modify, mount, rack it. They've got a bottleneck about modifying servers. So they came up with a plan to invest in robotics to get rid of the bottleneck. And they came up with an entire P&L, roughly $2 million of investment, a return on investment in under 1 year. So they're about to spend the money on robotics. So I asked them, can we quickly map it? This took 15 minutes. User needs compute. Compute, order server, server goods in. I'm going to argue with them because they've got compute as a product. I think it's more of a utility, but okay. And then they went rack, mount, modify. Anybody notice anything funny with that diagram? Why are racks in custom built? Yes. So I asked, why are racks in custom built? And they said, oh, we have custom built racks. Ah. So what are the modifications you're making to servers? Well, they don't fit our racks. Right, so what do? We take the cases off them, drill new holes, add new plates in order to get them to fit our racks. Ah. And that's why you need robotics, yes. There's another solution. Anybody know what it is? Use standard racks. Again, these people are not daft. They are just trapped by their history and context. So what you should be doing is doing this bit. Driving racks to more commodity. What they're focused on is process flow. It's the single thing that I see causing the biggest waste in organizations, people trying to make completely the wrong thing more efficient. If you actually move in this direction, then you can say compute should be a utility. That is the flow. So does investing in robotics make any sense in this world? Not at all. But then it's the same with the weighing scales. Because if you look at the map from the weighing scales, what they're trying to do is optimize the process flow, where in fact, paper forms have evolved, become more electronic records. That is what you should be doing. So why do we keep getting things wrong? And the reason is because it all makes sense when you look at it from a P&L point of view and a SWOT diagram and a process flow, because none of these things have any form of context within them. I do this with mergers and acquisitions. They spend 6 months doing due diligence, and then I get a day to map it out. And it's amazing. Some of these companies are clearly going over a cliff, but somehow in the 6 months, there has been no discovery of actual context. So that gets me to serverless. So this is where we started. Applications built in hardware, in compute. Plugs. Now, of course, this stuff, everything evolves. And so it evolved, and so we should concentrate not on how we make plugs better, but how we evolve the underlying components, which we did. We started to have custom-built systems like Leo, Lions Electronic Office. So we now got applications with operating systems on compute, custom-built, and that evolved. And then we came up with things like this, the IBM 650. So now we've got applications built with operating systems on compute as a product. And it had a characteristic called high MTTR, high mean time to recovery. So when my machine went bang, it would take me weeks to get a new one. So I did things like N+1, capacity planning, disaster recovery test. Do you remember that stuff? Good, right. So we built novel architectural practices. And this is because the practices often co-evolve with the activity itself. But that stuff evolved. And eventually a new faction was created. And we would go around and laugh at people who hadn't done their capacity planning. Your email server had run out of space, snigger. And then we got language frameworks. So what we got is applications, emerging coding practice on a runtime, on an operating system, a good architectural practice on compute as a product. And that evolved. And that's roughly where we were, and we were all happy. And we looked at ways of optimizing this process flow, particularly around this space here. So we used to do things like, don't just go from runtime to your host OS, to your hardware. We'll go runtime, guest OS, virtualization engine, host OS, hardware, or runtime. We'll go container engine like LXC, and then your host OS, and then your hardware. This is before cloud. We were all happy, and then cloud happened. That's cloud. The entire shift of compute from product to infrastructure. And it has a characteristic change. We go from high to low MTTR. So we develop new practices, distribute systems, design for failure, chaos engines, continuous deployment, because we're not waiting 3 months for the server to turn up. And of course, all the CEOs say, make my legacy cloudy. So they put the legacy on Amazon. Amazon has an outage, and everybody runs around the end of cloud is nigh. To which you go, shouldn't our architecture evolve as well? To which people went, burn him, heretic. Why? Because they had inertia from best architectural practice for computers a product. It's normal. Inertia created by past success. But this stuff evolved, and eventually a new faction, and we gave it a name. We called it DevOps. And we went around saying it's all about user needs, iterative cycles, automation, collaboration. And the old crowd went, so was ITIL. And we went, burn him, heretic. And operating systems became more of a utility. And now, the runtime. That's what serverless is about. The runtime is becoming a utility. So we got people like iRobot, 23 million robots, $15,000 a month IT expenditure. All of these companies building. We get all those benefits of efficiency, speed, new sources of value or work. New faction is appearing. New practices. Of course, here be dragons, it's all unknown. But what it means for the other side of the map is it's all the new legacy. But of course, if you say DevOps is the new legacy, people go, burn him, heretic. But I'm afraid it is, particularly if we continue this argument. If DevOps keeps on getting trapped in this world of containers, which is all about process optimization, rather than the evolution of the runtime from a product stack like .NET and LAMP to more utility forms, it will become the new legacy. We'll nick its practices, but we'll create a new flag and a new faction. That is where containers are focused. And all of the stuff below that line will become less visible because we won't care. That's what the serverless world is all about. And it's all about us shifting up that stack. So what are those new practices? I'll go back to the cup of tea. One of the things about maps is you often use them for looking at capital flow in organizations. Well, that capital flow doesn't have to be components. These can be functions. So we can start monitoring capital flow in applications. Suddenly, refactoring has value. This is all about the observability of capital flow. And there's really interesting companies out there. Epsagon, capital flow itself, Lumigo. But it's also about moving up the stack, not worrying about anything below the runtime. And anything with servers or below, containers or VMs, that's just epic fail now. This is about a world where we get things like conversational programming. Alex Arders should be in the audience. Go and have a chat with him. If you want to know where the future is, that is the future. Meet your future data center, head of operations, and lead developer. It's called Alexa. It's already learning how to program. So quick recap. We started off with the issue of strategy. I talked about why maps matter, why they're important for communication. We talked about some basic economic patterns, how you can use them for anticipation, the concept of flow, both process and evolutionary flow, and what serverless is. This stuff is all Creative Commons. I made it Creative Commons 14 years ago. You can find it all online. It's about 600 pages. Help yourself. It'll take you through all the patterns as well. And at that point, I'm going to say thank you.